Hello children, as I promised you, I am back with you to continue the lesson on literary devices. Can you remember the previous day's lesson? What did we do? Right, we discussed about poetry basically and the features of poetry and some devices and types of poetry like narrative poetry and then lyrical poetry. And can you remember the devices? I discussed symbolism or symbols and then irony and then what else? Can you remember the whole thing? Right. So, quickly we will recapitulate all these things, and before I move on to the lesson, I will ask you a question. Can you remember the difference between verse and stanza? And I taught you different types of rhyming patterns and the names given to 3-line stanza, 4-line stanza, and then 6-line and 8 lines. I hope you all can remember all these new words you learned that day, and today I am going to continue some of the other literary devices that are coming in literary texts. So, shall we move on to see what is there on slides? Repetition. So, usually when we speak also we use repetition. Actually, why do we use repetition? To emphasize something that we want to say. So, if you are requesting something, you say, I need a bag, I need it, something like that, to show your urgency or show your requirement, right. So, likewise in literary texts also, poets use these devices to emphasize certain feelings or ideas, right. So, sometimes we get line repetition, sometimes we get word repetition, or sometimes we get the whole verse repeated in certain poems. So, let me see. Line repetition. In the poem Boy is Kind, at the end of every verse, the poet says boy is kind. He wants to bring out a particular idea there to emphasize that he is giving that line boy is kind. And when it comes to the poem Farewell to Barn and Stuck and Tree, you find a lot of repetition there. The word farewell to mean that boy is going to say goodbye to that place, to show that he is no more staying there and it is his urgent requirement to leave that place. He says farewell and it is repeated. At the same time, the word long, long will wait the rick, long will wait the fold, to show his long absence and his idea that he is no more going to be in village and won't come back soon. That idea is there with the word long and it is repeated. At the same time, he says that my bloody hands and I, to show his guilt-ridden mind or show his guilt, right. So, his guilty conscience, and with that he says that he did some kind of crime and he says my bloody hands. It is repeated. So, to emphasize that idea or emphasize that feeling, we use repetition in poetry, right. Then in the poem, I know why the cage bird sings, father and son, you find this whole verse of course repeated in these poems. So, there is a purpose in doing so, and that is to emphasize the idea that they are going to convey in the poem, right. Then again in the poem Boy is Kind, Stephen Crane repeats the title War is Kind, and it is to suggest sarcasm and irony. What do you mean by these two words? And actually, is war kind? No, it brings a lot of destruction. It brings a lot of pain and sorrow to the minds of people. Physically, as physical resources are wasted and even human lives are wasted, and so to bring out that destruction and everything, he wants to convey the opposite meaning, but he says war is kind, and there he wants to bring kind of sarcasm. He is saying that war is not so, war is different, and he brings kind of destruction. But in the poem, he sarcastically criticizing the people who are admiring war, right. So, then there lies irony as well. What do you mean by irony? When it comes to irony, if I say this example, some of you are running and suddenly one of your friends fell down, then one of you can say, oh, well done. So, Actually, when that person fell down, is it something to say well done? No, you mean something opposite, but you use the words well done, right. So, that is known as irony, it is verbal irony, right. Then we thought he was everything. That is a line taken from the poem Richard Coore, because right at the beginning these people on pavement thought that he is everything, but later on when they got to know that he had committed suicide, they understood that he was not everything. So, they are in this line, because of that end or because he committed suicide, we can say that there lies irony in this line. We thought he was everything, because if he was everything, that wouldn't have happened, because then he seems to be a person having lot of wealth, as well as people thought that he can be their role model. But actually when he died committing suicide, people's idea was wrong. So, we can take this line as where there is irony in that, because the situation is different from their idea. Then satire. Satire is a witty language used to convey insult or scorn. Insult somebody or scorn. Scorn, again we can say disgust, or you are going to have a kind of dislike, right. So, then let us see an example for that. I have learned to wear many faces like dress. So, this is a line from the poem Once Upon a Time. There in that poem, when you learn it, you will understand that the speaker says that in the past he met some genuine people. By now in the society he meet different types of people, those who are not genuine. So, he says that according to the situation, he too has to change his face. So, that means he is not willing to do so, but to survive in the society he has to do so. So, there is a kind of deceitfulness in that, and at the same time his scorn, because he does not like to do so, and because of that, to show his scorn, he says, I have learned to wear many faces like dress. They are like dress, again another literary device we learned that day. What is it? Metaphor or a simile? Yes, because the word like, we can just say that it is a simile. Then move on to the next slide. Paradox or oxymoron. Paradox. It is again conveying two contradictory ideas or words together to give a total meaning, right. So, oxymoron also similar to that, and a statement or proposition, argument or theory that seems self-contradictory or absurd, but in reality expresses a possible hidden truth, right. Let us see what is there. Flashpoint in paradise. This is a line taken from the poem Big Match, and here paradise. What do you mean by the word paradise? Sri Lanka is considered to be a paradise. It is very beautiful. We have all the resources we want, and we have a very comparatively better climate, and we do not have all these volcanoes or kind of like natural disasters so much other than this landslides or earthquakes. And so, our country is very beautiful. Biodiversity is very high in Singaraja and all these places. We are blessed with to have these places in our country, and so we have to admire these natural resources as well, and we have to protect them as well. So, then only it becomes a paradise actually, and then this paradise had a kind of flashpoint. That means kind of unhappy things to say that it was on fire like, right. So, kind of destruction. So, flashpoint in paradise. Two words together. In a paradise there cannot be, but it can't go with paradise, the word flashpoint. But here the poet has used to show that destruction, right. Then again, speak silence with thy glimmering eyes. This is a line from the poem To the Evening Star. The words speak silence. Can you speak silence? Silence gives a totally different meaning with the word speak, and especially with the eyes. How can you speak silence with your eyes? So, but when it comes to the poem, generally in overall meaning, we can take this as a line that gives a very good meaning according to that context. That is why we gave the definition, expresses a possible hidden truth, right? I hope you understand these two ideas, paradox or oxymoron. This comes in poetry and it has economy of language because the writer opens up our mind to think of many things and many aspects and look at things relating these words to our knowledge and the environment or the society we are exposed to. And if we find a poem in that describes another culture, again we get a kind of better understanding. So, that is why previous day in my lesson I told you literature helps you to understand cultures of other people as well, right. So, when other people read this poem, the people around the world, when they read this poem Paradise, Flashpoint, they are going to think of this, why, what is this situation, what are they going to describe with this. So, they are going to find some information, what kind of history is there attached to this idea here. So, not only cultures, but sometimes literature helps us learn about the history of a particular country or particular region, right. Exaggeration or hyperbole. These two are again somewhat similar actually. The word hyperbole means overcasting. So, when it comes to an expression where we want to show to a greater strength, we use this exaggeration, and then for the sake of emphasis, we use this literary device of exaggeration to emphasize certain feelings or ideas, right. So, in day to day life also you use this type of things in Sinhala as well. So, then close to the sun in lonely lands. So, this is a line taken from the poem The Eagle. So, can anybody, even a bird or even a human, I mean without in a rocket or anything, can go, even in a rocket, can you go close to the sun? Nobody can, right. So, but it shows the freedom, the ability, the power the bird has close to the sun, the relationship that the bird has with the sunlight, but here the bird is personified. So, there are different other meanings that we can take here. When you study this poem, of course, you can learn all these ideas, and for the time being, now remember that nobody can go close to the sun, but here to give a very strong idea to suggest the bird's freedom or bird's ability to roam in the sky and its greater heights that it reaches, we use this phrase close to the sun in lonely lands. It is a kind of exaggeration or overcasting, right. Then again, richer than a king. This is a line taken from the poem Richard Cory. Richer than a king. King is again a symbol. So, when you hear the word king, I think you know that you suddenly remember the wealth that the king has, the possession of all these lands, and then after that his power, right. So, king is a very powerful symbol here. Then richer than a king. So, there the word richer suggests us that we are talking here the king's wealth, right. You know that king owns so many animals and like horses, elephants, and the power of the king, and when it comes to wealth, it's so high, right. So, then this person called Richard Cory is richer than a king. Can that be person richer than a king? So, there a kind of exaggeration is used to show his wealth, to show that he is a millionaire like, right. Then a king on a throne, again the similar thing, king is repeated there, but it comes in another poem, The Clown's Wife. So, king again on a throne. So, when it comes to this king, what is the idea suggested there? Same king, the symbol, but see the difference, right? King on a throne. So, when the king is seated, what happens? All the people are looking at him. The king becomes the center of attraction, and people believe the words of the king. They take the words of the king, or they take the orders of the king. No more the person is important, but only the king, right. So, it shows that when the clown is there on stage, he is the one who has the sole authority to keep the audience attracted to him, and he becomes the center of attraction, right. So, the same symbol king we used in two different poems to mean two things. That is known as symbol of king, symbolism, right. Symbol of king used to convey different meanings. Fine. I hope the idea is clear to you. Right. We will see what is there on the next slide. Onomatopoeia. So, that is something to do with sound. So, when the train moves on the railway track, what a big noise it gives, right. Then we call it rattle of the train. Sometimes when you were small, in your nursery classes, forming, holding each one's shoulders, you might have formed a train, and then after that making that noise of the train, you might have moved around the classroom, right. So, what did I do? I just help you to have kind of visual in your mind. You created that picture in your mind, isn't it? You went back to your nursery days, right. So, there you are going to use that sound to convey the meaning. Now, when a door closed, bang, the door closed, the sound of the door closing, right. So, we use that onomatopoeia to convey the meaning. The formation of a word from a sound associated with what is named. So, when you take this line, voice kind, horse, booming drums of the regiment. So, when the drums are beaten, we just get attracted to that. So, poets use this type of device to make their poems very interesting, as well as to tell us that how we can enjoy using these words. They are going to make it like compact. The idea is there, and they are going to convey a great idea, but with some words that are going to give the meaning, right. So, they are, what's the sound? It comes, booming sound. So, we get that sound in our mind, and mind when we read these things and we get attracted. Fine. Onomatopoeia is that. Then rhetoric questions. How many of you have addressed the assembly and given a speech on assembly? Right. Then to start your speech, sometimes you might have raised a question, right. But did you expect an answer from the principal, the teachers, or from your sisters and brothers, those who are listening to you? No. But to give a very interesting beginning or start, you raise that question to make a kind of a start to your speech, right. Very good beginning. You are going to raise a question, but actually you are not expecting an answer. So, the same thing is there in poems as well. The writers use this device to open up our mind and let us think far and far, and to combine our knowledge, world knowledge, or what we know to that, and think of it better or think of it more, right. So, then rhetoric questions. About my husband the clown, what could I say? When you hear this line, we understand that this lady, because she is talking about her husband, right. So, has a problem. So, to show that, that line is enough. With that rhetoric question, with the line about my husband the clown, what could I say? She is answerless, like she has a problem. So, that very idea is conveyed with this rhetoric question, right. It is very easy to convey ideas using these literary devices. Economy of language, right. Clown's wife doesn't expect an answer from the readers, but hearing that, or by looking at that line, we can get an idea, or we can think that okay, she is going to discuss something that she doesn't have an answer, she has a problem. So, these ideas are suggested, right. Okay, the next example, shall I read it? This is a rhetoric question, and you find this in the poem Upside Down, and there it creates a dramatic effect, as well as we get a kind of suspension whether this person is going to read this. He gets a letter from his aunts, the person called Upside Down, and he has a kind of doubt, shall I read it? So, we as readers find whether he is going to read it or not. That kind of suspension, as well as we have to think of, according to his behavior, whether he will read it or not. So, that is to be decided by the reader, right. So, thereby the poet makes his poetry or the poem very interesting, right. So, these techniques bring variety to the poem, as well as these devices are helpful to make the poem very beautiful, of course, we say, right. So, language plays there, right. So, priority is for the language, how we are going to use it with these devices. Flashback, another technique. So, when you are relating stories to friends in classroom, sometimes while the conversation is going on, you may say that, by the way, you know, something happened to me yesterday. So, you are going to draw the attention of your friends to a past event, somewhere at present where you were in that particular conversation, but you are taking the attention of your listeners, of your friends, to an event that happened in the past. So, that kind of device is known as flashback in literature, and in literary texts we find this as well. Narrative technique of interrupting the chronological sequence. That is what I told you. While talking with your friends, suddenly from there you are taking your friends to a past event, right. So, then chronological sequences change. You are not going forward, but you are going to take your friends backward to think of something that happened past. That is why we call it flashback. Shall I read the definition again, because I could not complete it? Narrative technique of interrupting the chronological sequence of events to interject events of earlier occurrence. That is why. So, something related to the idea you are going to say, but you need that memory of the past event. So, it is very easy to develop even novels. You have this sometimes even in if you have read Jataka stories, you know that the present, past ideas are there, then the flashback is there in the Jataka stories as well, right. Examples. These lines are taken from some of the poems in your syllabus. And before that fatal hour, earthen goblet. So, that ball of clay is going to think of its past life before it comes to the hands of the potter, right. Before that fatal hour, where the potter is going to turn him or change its shape to another object. What is the object? Goblet, right. So, then before that fatal hour. So, that bowl of clay, again the personification technique is used there, personification, and as if that ball of clay has life in that poem, the ball of clay speaks, right. So, that is why before that fatal hour, ball of clay is going to think of its past life before he came into the hands of the potter. Then, I was one like you are now. So, here father and son, he is recalling his past life as a young boy. He is talking to his son, and father says, son, I also had a time like you. So, he is going to think of his past, and then it is a kind of flashback, right. So, is the idea clear to you? Look at the third example as well. Come, Lampstide. So, here farewell to Barnstacken tree. There, Lampstide is a festive season where you are going to make bread and then share those things with people and happy events. So, again the speaker is thinking of all these past events, and he is requesting his friend to come there to Lampstide, right. So, flashback is a technique where the writer can take the reader to a past event in relation to what he is going to say at present, right. Flashback, like flashback, we have flash forward as well, or there is another name for that, prolepsis. flash forward or prolepsis. Shall we read the definition first? Prolepsis is a literary device in which the plot goes ahead of time, meaning a scene that interrupts and takes the narrative forward in time from the current time in the story. So, here in flashback what happened? From the current time taken the reader's mind to a past event. Here thinking of something that may happen in future, they are going to have a kind of forward in time. There is a difference in that, and that is why we say flash forward. Flashback, easy to remember, and flash forward. Then he joked that he wished a bomb would go off so we could all leave Lahore and go back home. This is a quotation take from the prose Lahore Attack, a speech given by Kumar Sangakkar, and there he is going to remind or recall an event that just before they were attacked, Taranga was saying that idea, if there was a bomb blast and if he could get back home, so he wanted to finish everything, and like he was frustrated, that idea is also there. But soon after, what happened was actually there was a kind of attack, terrorist attack for them. So, that is a flash forward point where as if he felt it, but actually it may not be, he has just cracked a joke, but really in that it came to a reality, right. So, there flash forward technique is used. Archaic language. So, this is also some kind of old English words. We are not using these words very often now, but in poetry you find these words and different thou, thy, thine. Thou means you, thine means your, right. So, thy hands, your hands, right. So, here of a word or a style of language no longer in everyday use, but sometimes used to impart an old fashioned flavor. So, when you hear these words also, it is a kind of interesting idea comes to our mind, because these words are not very commonly heard, right. So, that also gives a kind of variety and language used in that particular poem, right. So, examples: thou fair-haired angel, thou fair-haired angel. This is a line from the poem To the Evening Star. So, the star is addressed by the poet as thou fair-haired angel, you fair-haired, addressing the star. Then again the sacred dew, protect them with thine influence, again the word thine, with your influence. Divine power that the star has, according to the poet, or according to his point of view, he imagines, he thinks that this star has divine power, and he requests the star to protect them with her influence. So, to use the, instead of using the word her or your, the poet has used old fashioned flavor using the word thine. It brings a kind of variety, isn't it? It makes the poem beautiful. So, all these old fashioned words are known as archaic language. The idea is clear to you. Imagery. When it comes to imagery, there are different types of imagery. We take our five senses and we have different imagery when we see, when we hear, when we feel, and then when we taste, right. So, there are different names for these imagery. So, shall we go through them? Before that, I want you to read what is there on the slide. Imagery is when a writer uses vivid, figurative or descriptive language too. The language is very vivid, different, and figurative, very interesting with all these words, right. Appeal to the reader's senses. That is what I told you, our five senses, right. Ear, nose, tongue, skin, right, and then help the reader create a picture in their mind. So, we can have some pictures in our mind. Can you remember right at the beginning of the lesson also, I just asked you to think of our previous lesson, and I related some of your nursery days events like forming a train, holding your friend's shoulders and running around the classroom with the noise that the train is moving, right? Then add depth to their work, that's it. So, it becomes sometimes a bit complicated with these ideas, but it brings a kind of variety and interesting ideas to our mind, right. So, help the reader feel present in the moment. Yes, so we are also active participants there in the poem, and when we read it, we become active participants. That is why we say help the reader feel present in the moment. We are in that particular situation the poet is going to describe. Then communicate the world of the text to the reader. So, it may be a different experience that you had never known or had experienced. So, with this you can just get an idea. So, there are different types of imagery. Shall we move on to see those? Visual imagery. So, with your eyes you are going to have this pertains to graphics, visual scenes, pictures or the sense of sight. Now, look here, look at this picture. So, you can see a cage bird, and there is that symbol to say that the bird is making a noise. Most probably it won't be singing. Do you think the bird is singing happily? No, because it is caged. What happens when a bird is caged? Think of you, if you are put into a cell and then you are not allowed to move out of that, or if the door is closed in the room and you are punished. So, how do you feel? So, you imagine, oh, if I could go out, what will be my friends outside doing now, right? So, you are very much bothered, you are unhappy. So, likewise, we are creating pictures in our mind with this visual imagery, and then teenagers in jeans, they are talking. So, when you hear this line, of course, you get a picture of teenagers in their dresses, in their jeans, talking to each other. So, we get an idea of that picture, but only the words are here. But the words are powerful enough to create that picture in our mind. Into his cup he put milk, right. So, what happens? We get the picture in our mind. We imagine that how a person is going to put some milk into his cup. So, these words are powerful enough to create pictures in our mind. So, we call it visual imagery, right. So, this is a line taken from the poem Breakfast. Into his cup he put milk. Auditory imagery, something to do with sound, right. So, then pertains to sound, noises, music or the sense of hearing. So, I think you can remember the visual that I have used here, right. So, you get all these ideas when you look at this picture, the sound the bird makes, right. Then wolf rages wide. So, that is a line taken from the poem To the Evening Star. And what happens? So, there you hear the sound of wolves raging, wolves sound, right. So, it is echoing in your mind sometimes, maybe if you have experience. If you have not experienced, what are you going to do? You are trying to think of, oh, what sound it can be. So, after that you are going to think of it and you are going to find it out, right. So, what the sound it makes. So, you want to hear that after that. So, that is why you become very inquisitive if you have not heard wolves raging, right. So, of course, wolves are not here in Sri Lanka, I hope. So, it is something different from our geographical condition or background. So, definitely you may try to find this sound and listen to that, or imagine what sound it can be like. So, you are going to compare that with the sound that you have heard wolves. Maybe if you have heard the sound of a tiger, lion, so you may think whether that is similar to that. So, you become inquisitive, right. So, anyhow this sound is going to create an effect in your mind. So, you feel like you hear that sound. Auditory imagery pertains to sound, noises, music or the sense of hearing, and even with that onomatopoeia you get this same thing, bang, the door close. the rattling of the chains, the rattling sound of the chains, right? The cage bird sings with a fearful trill. So, you hear that fearful trill. In your mind, you think how sad that tone will be, right? So, because the bird is not free. Thinking of the birds who are outside, you feel sorry for this cage bird? Yes, you think of it. If that happened to you, what are you going to feel? How do you feel? And what are you going to do? You may also sob. You may also weep, and you may also request, please release me, please take me out. All these requests you may make. So, you feel empathy. Oh, if that happened to me. So, you have to always think that one day when somebody faces something, the other day it may happen to us, right. So, thinking that, sympathizing with that person is necessary, even if it is an animal, even if it is a bird, we can do that. Even if it is a person or a bird or whatever it is, empathy is necessary. Now, how many of you have felt this? When you are eating, if a cat or a dog comes close to you and looking at you, I have seen some, of course, they just ignore. Some, of course, feel very sorry, right. So, then what are they going to do? They are going to give food, or some, of course, they don't give. So, those who don't give may not be animal lovers. But I think if you feel that, oh, I say if I was in hunger and being this animal that he can't speak, it can't say that I am hungry, give me some food, but only thing it can do is just to look and wait. So, you have to have these feelings, and that is why I told you literature makes a person very sensitive. Literature may change your attitudes, right. So, after that, looking at that picture, looking at that movie, sometimes really when you experience that, you may feel, oh, I say so far I have been doing something. It's not the way. If I was that dog, what will happen to me? How can I ask? How can I get food? So, have that. Literature opens your mind and may allow you to think of so many things differently, right. Tactile imagery, again what's it? Appeals to the represents the sense of touch. So, can you remember, oh, I think you have not done the poem still, but when you do the poem, the earthen goblet, you may feel this a lot. At the same time, very simple example, when it is very cold, what do? Are you going to switch on the fan? No, you find a kind of fire or kind of oven. In foreign countries, they gather around it because that provides you warmth, and you feel it here, right. So, at the same time, when you are very cold, you do the same, and when you are very warm and when you feel very much hot and sweating, again you are going to have a fan switch on. Then what happens to you? You feel that coldness to your body. So, you get that sensation to your skin, touch, right. So, then from the great potter's hand that burns so warm. So, potter's hand was very warm, might be the event that the potter is going to put it into the kiln or to burn it, right. Before burning, even that ball of clay had felt that feeling. So, feeling of touch. So, that is known as tactile imagery, right. Sri Lanka burns alive, personification as well. Sri Lanka is just the name of our country, and then burns alive, we feel that, right. So, this is again from the poem Big Match, and we are going to talk about that flames that burn things, and then the destruction and the misery that the people had and how much they suffered, all these things. So, that is why the poet says Sri Lanka burns alive. Alive is very important there. So, then only we feel it, right. If we are dead, cremation in the crematorium, we do not feel it because we are dead, our five senses are not working. Olfactory imagery, another literary device, and can you imagine what it is? Olfactory pertains to odor, sense, or the sense of a smell. After getting the sweet scent of a rose or a beautiful flower, you are going to enjoy that. So, sweet scent of Aralia flowers. So, you may have that idea, and you may feel that sweet scent of Aralia flowers when you hear these words, right? Sweet scent of Aralia flowers or temple flowers. Then the fragrant friendship. So that friendship was so endearing and so intimate, so close. That person feels it as a fragrant, like a fragrant flower, right? So friendship is so pure. Friendship is so close to that person. That is the idea. Then when you get the smell of food at home, your hunger, what happens? Grows up. So that is also again olfactory imagery. So when mother is cooking in the kitchen, you get the aroma of the food, right? So then you are going to get stimulated and you are going to say that I'm hungry now, right? So fine, that is olfactory imagery. Gustatory or gustative imagery. So can you see the picture there? Strawberry and strawberry jam, very tempting, isn't it? And when you see that picture, what happens to you? You feel the taste of a strawberry and you get a kind of temptation and you feel it. Gustatory pertains to flavors or the sense of taste. Will there be strawberry jam for tea? Right, so that is a line taken from the prose Lumber Room. And then boy Nicholas is asking his aunt whether he can have some jam, strawberry jam for tea, specialized strawberry jam. So you are going to visualize those pictures of a strawberry jam, at the same time the taste of it. Especially here when it comes to gustatory, it's something to do with taste. And if I say, oh, if we can have some ice cream or if you can have some coffee, right? So you get the taste of coffee or the taste of ice cream. So that is something to do with your feelings of or sense of taste. Then it is known as gustatory or gustative. Then what is the definition given there? Pertains to flavors or the sense of taste, is the representation of the action and movements of an object or character. Kinesthetic imagery, right? So there kinesthetic imagery is to talk about actions or movements. Now look at the examples. He watches from his mountain walls. Mountain walls and watches from mountain walls. We can create that picture in our mind. Somebody is watching from mountain walls. So the action is given here, kinesthetic imagery, right? He made rings, breakfast with cigarettes. That person was making rings, right? So he made rings. We have that action in our mind. We feel it. So then it becomes kinesthetic imagery. Then he shuts the door and turns the lock. We feel those actions or movements, isn't it? And then he shuts the door and turns the lock. You get these ideas in your mind as well as you have these actions or movements, and you become active participant of that poem or the literary work you are reading, because you are going to create all these pictures in your mind with these types of imagery we discussed so far. There's one more to discuss. Now, is that clear to you? The types of imagery up to now: visual, auditory, yes, olfactory, gustatory, kinesthetic, and then what's it? Organic imagery. This concentrates on recreating internal sensation like hunger, thirst, fear or fatigue. You are tired, you are terrified, and you have thirst or you are hungry, right? So then they were barefoot, but they didn't slow down because thorns hurt them. So when there are stones and thorns, what happens when you are walking without slippers, without shoes? Do you feel the pain of it? Yes. Then what happens to you? If you are walking like that, you automatically walk slowly and it gives a kind of pain, right? So, but then all these feelings are there, but still fear, fatigue, everything, right? But still these two kids of this mother, the wave is the text that I have taken these lines, and Sonali Dharaniyagala is describing a particular situation where they caught up in tsunami and then they were barefoot her two kids, but they didn't slow down because stones or thorns hurt them. Here stones and thorns suggest us the idea of pain and the fatigue that they had to walk on that, but they were going on without complaining. Right. The next one, up all night keeping a watch. Again, it is something to do with fatigue. Why? Waking up all night without a sleep. It's very painful for us to like think of it. Even how many of you can stay without sleeping one night or two nights? Here in this poem that speaker says that they had to do that every night, up all night keeping a watch, because they are frightened whether they will be attacked, right? So then here again something to do with their fear and at the same time fatigue, because sleepless night means a person becomes very tired, right? So these lines with these words, we get all these ideas. That is why we call them literary devices. In literary texts, we find this type of idea, but we use language. Maybe this is because we are talking about English literature. Here the language is English, but in Sinhala also we have the same thing. And when it comes to Japanese or any other language people use, they also have all these feelings and ideas and everything. They express that with their language, using their language. That is the difference, right? Here all these emotions, all these feelings are same for all human beings as well as animals. Now when it comes to personification, when we give those human qualities to animals, we can easily express the ideas, right? So that is why we use that specially. We want to talk about something different beyond the imagery that we are using, beyond the symbol that we are using. The poets are going to personify the objects or the animals and things they find, right? So then they can make their poetry very effective, right? Alliteration, sound effect, right? It is the repetition of the same sound or letter at the beginning of each or most of the words in a sentence or in a line, right? So poetry, it's a line. So let's go through this. The picture eagle is there, and he clasps the crag with the crooked hands. Now how many k sound with the letter C are repeated in the same line? I have underlined, and you can see that clasp C, crag C, crooked C, CR sound, right? K, k, k. So we can just say, to bring out the effect of the roughness of the surface that the bird is there, the poet might have used this device called, what is this device now? Alliteration, the repetition of the sound at the beginning of a word. Now clasps, the first letter is that, crag the first letter C, crooked first letter C, and together that consonant cluster, it makes a sound kr, right? So there's another sound device known as consonants. Consonants means the sound of consonants, the recurrence of similar sounds, especially consonants in close proximity, nearness in space. Now see, here the first one, I want to take this again. Here the first letter of each word. But when it comes to these consonants, there the s sound comes not at the beginning. Here somewhere close to the ending point, and here at the beginning, and two s's repeat here, right? So that is why then when we find that s sound repeated in nearness in the same line, we call it consonants. I think you understood the difference between consonants and alliteration, right? Next sound is assonance. Assonance is something to do with the vowel sound, right? So repetition of identical or similar vowel sounds in neighboring words. But to take a large hoe and a shovel also. Now you can see that sound O is repeated, the vowel sound, to mean panting when working maybe, right? So, but to take a large hoe and shovel and also, O sound. We can interpret it that way, right? So, because we don't meet the writer, we are just going to give our ideas to the poem, taking these devices and everything. That is something we are going to do when we analyze and giving all these meanings to those lines. Monologue. A speech given by a single person to an audience or a person addressing another one while he is listening, right? So, that other listener is not speaking, but the speaker is going on to say those things to that person, but the person who is listening is not going to respond. Then the speaker is speaking, right? Terence, you look your last at me. So, we do not want Terence to look at him or the response he gives, nothing is going to be cared for or see to, but only thing we are worried about the speaker's lines. Terence, you look your last at me. Crying, I cannot understand, fairly long lines are here, twilight of the crane. So, here after Yohio fell asleep, Sue is going to worry. Then Yohio does not hear any of these words that she says, but she speaks to the audience and she says these words and ideas to the audience, but audience also not going to respond, right? Then soliloquy. Again, a speech in a play in which an actor or an actress speaks to himself or herself. Here the difference is that the audience or the other actors on the stage do not show that this person, what this person says is heard by them. They do not show any reaction, right? So, when Yohio fell asleep, Sue speaks to herself, this is it, everything comes from. She goes on saying, because of course, here Yohio is asleep, he does not hear anything, but when it comes to another instance also, other players on the stage or else the audience are not going to respond, but let that person go on saying his ideas. So, I think you understood the difference between soliloquy and monologue, and there we find all these things especially in drama or playlets, and you have 2 dramas also in your syllabus. Other than that, when you watch all these stage dramas, even sometimes when you watch television movies also, you may hear these television series, teledramas. Sometimes you may have come across with these things. And then today's lesson is going to come to an end, and I am going to meet you soon with some other literary devices and some other interesting poems to discuss all these things. Until then, I am going to say goodbye to you.